Are tariffs the answer to economic gain or prosperity? Well, this sounds like a political question, but it's not. What I'm trying to do is present the question in a way that is nonpartisan, non-political, but gets you thinking about the situation or scenario. Now, economic productivity is generally based upon four factors. We know this. That is consumption that takes place within the borders of your jurisdiction, that is within the United States. So what we buy as consumers. Then we have investment spending by businesses. This does not include wages unless you use an alternative model of measuring productivity. But what is being consumed, if you will, or spent by businesses in terms of infrastructure and other spending that they do? That could be B2B spending for any products, any resources, raw materials, even marketing services and other professional services that they spend on outside of the internal organization can be, again, business investment. So then we have government spending, and that's how much money the government puts into the economy, either as a payor itself on independent contracts and things like that, or the amount of money invested in through direct or injection of capital through stimulus funds or direct government spending through infrastructure projects and things of that nature. And then lastly, by far the smallest piece of the puzzle is what is either added or taken away to total productivity when you balance out trade. That is, if you export more than you import, then you have a positive trade balance. And that positive balance, one minus the other, is added to productivity, GDP. So if you have a trade deficit like the United States does at this point, then you would subtract what they export from what they import. And because what they import is greater than what they export, you would actually subtract that from GDP. And so that is what you look at for strength of the dollar and overall economic productivity of the nation. Now, tariffs, we know, will have an effect on that. We previously talked about in a video what affects DOGE and their efforts towards government efficiency. Well, what that is going to do is reduce government spending. So that is going to reduce GDP to a certain extent. Now, with the reduction in spending, if you're going to keep productivity the same, you're going to have to grow in other areas. So does that mean you need more consumption? You need more investment spending? Or you need to run less of a trade deficit or even have a trade surplus to make up the difference. And that's very difficult to do because oftentimes any cuts in government spending oftentimes also accompanied by reductions in consumption, simply because much of government spending has the effect of bolstering the consumption capacity of spenders. That is, people who are not primarily saving. So ultimately that increased consumption helps or improves GDP. So now let's look at trade balances and the idea that if we produce and export more than we import, then we are somehow in a better economic position than we would be otherwise. And there's a lot of debate about this among economists. Someone who's more mercantilist in principle says that the nation who produces more is obviously in a better economic position, where others will look at it as those who are actually doing the consumption are in a better economic position because ultimately it represents your comparative advantage in the production process over elsewhere. That is, the value of our labor that it takes to produce something here is much more valuable than an hour of labor elsewhere. So you pay someone else far less money to do that thing so you can focus your hour of labor on things that have a greater impact where you are. And generally that relates to services to the people where you are, or advancements in technology and things of that nature where the value of your dollar goes further in investment in that area because you have greater infrastructure, you have greater ability to create these things. And that's kind of how the United States has been for quite a while now. So if you put tariffs on things that are coming into the country, you're trying to level the playing field so that you're making the good more expensive. Now, economics will tell you the idea of elasticity says how much of the additional expense is borne by the individual selling it to the country, that is, the retailer or the distributor importer bringing it into the country, versus the individual consuming it. What percentage of the tariff or cost increase is borne by whom? But regardless, some of the cost is almost always borne by the consumer. So increase in price, we know, will reduce consumption. So ultimately, that will hurt GDP. So the question becomes, how is this going to affect the economy overall? Is the fact that we are going to have a lower consumption, will that somehow be offset by a new incentive or revolution for us to produce more in the United States? So even if we buy less, we're buying more of our own products, thereby creating additional manufacturing systems and job systems and things of that nature. So you're becoming very nationalistic in nature, trying to seal off the rest of the world and saying, we don't care that you can do this cheaper. We're going to do it at a more expensive rate here, but we're going to supply our own needs for ourselves. Now, many of you out there study economics. You may have an opinion on this based upon your study or research. If you do, jump into the comments below. Love to get the conversation going. If you have opinions on it, jump on the forums at thebusinessprofessor.com. Let us hear your opinion. But regardless, I hope to see you around the platform soon. So until then, take care.